Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. Sometimes the most dangerous assumption you can make is that someone who loves you will wait forever. I learned this lesson the hard way, watching my marriage die not from conflict, but from my wife's relief every time I stopped trying to connect with her. What happened next still haunts her to this day, though she'll never admit it was her own doing. It started on a Wednesday night in October, 3 years into what I thought was a solid marriage. We were getting ready for bed, going through our usual routine of brushing teeth, changing clothes, and settling in for the night. The bedroom felt comfortable, familiar. We'd shared this space for years, but lately, it had begun to feel more like a hotel room where two strangers happened to be staying. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her apply her nighttime skincare routine with the same methodical precision she brought to everything else in her life. She looked beautiful in the soft lamplight, and for a moment, I felt that familiar pull of attraction, the desire to connect with the woman I'd promised to love for the rest of my life. I reached over to touch her shoulder gently, just a simple gesture of affection. Nothing demanding, nothing pressuring, just the kind of touch that used to be natural between us. The response was immediate and predictable. "Not tonight, honey. I'm just exhausted." But here's what caught my attention. What made this rejection different from all the others? She didn't look sorry. She didn't look tired either. She looked relieved, like she'd successfully avoided something unpleasant. The way you'd look after declining a sales call or getting out of a boring meeting. There was actual relief in her eyes, followed by a subtle relaxation in her shoulders, as if tension had just left her body. That moment of relief on her face made me start paying attention to things I'd been too trusting, too optimistic, or maybe too naive to notice before. We'd been together for 5 years total, married for 3. In the beginning, like most couples who were genuinely attracted to each other, physical intimacy was natural, frequent, something we both looked forward to. It wasn't just about sex, either. We'd hold hands while watching movies, kiss for no reason while cooking dinner, find excuses to touch each other throughout the day. Physical affection was how we spoke to each other when words weren't enough. But somewhere along the way, that language had become foreign to her. Physical intimacy had transformed from something that connected us into something that happened to her rather than something she wanted. The change had been so gradual that I'd adapted to each new normal without really questioning what was happening to our relationship. The decline had been subtle enough that I'd accepted each phase as temporary. First, it went from the easy spontaneity of newlyweds to a few times a week on a sort of informal schedule. Then weekly, usually on Saturday nights after we'd had a good day together. Then every couple of weeks, and even then it felt more like she was checking a box than expressing desire. By the time I realized what was happening, we were down to maybe once a month, and even that felt like I was imposing on her schedule, interrupting her real life with an inconvenient request. The excuses had evolved too, becoming more sophisticated and harder to argue with. Early in our relationship, if she wasn't in the mood, she'd say so directly, and we'd find other ways to connect. Maybe we'd talk for hours, or just hold each other, or find some other way to be close. The rejection never felt like rejection because it came with an alternative form of intimacy. But as time went on, the rejections became more elaborate and more final. Work stress, headaches, stomach problems, early meetings, late nights, fatigue from exercise, fatigue from not exercising enough. There was always something, and increasingly, that something didn't come with any alternative suggestion for connection. The rejections had become walls rather than redirections. What bothered me wasn't the occasional rejection. Life happens, people get tired, stress affects everyone differently. What bothered me was the pattern. And more specifically, what bothered me was that expression of relief I'd started noticing whenever I backed off. It wasn't just that she didn't want intimacy. It was that she seemed genuinely happier when I didn't want it either. Thursday night, I decided to test something. Instead of my usual approach, instead of the gentle touches and subtle suggestions that had become our courtship ritual, I simply got into bed, said goodnight, and rolled to my side. No touching, no hints, no attempt at intimacy. Just straight to sleep, like we were roommates sharing a bed for convenience. The change in her demeanor was immediate and noticeable. She was noticeably more relaxed the entire evening leading up to bedtime. More talkative during dinner, asking about my day, and actually listening to the answers. more animated while we watched TV, laughing at things that normally would get a polite smile, more comfortable as we got ready for bed, humming softly while she brushed her teeth. The absence of any romantic expectation seemed to make her genuinely happier, more like the woman I'd fallen in love with, except for the part where she clearly preferred when I didn't want her. Friday night, I repeated the experiment. Same thing. I kept my distance, made no moves, created no tension around the possibility of physical connection. I treated her like a good friend I happened to share a bed with. Again, she seemed more at ease, more relaxed, more willing to engage in conversation and casual affection. She even initiated a hug while we were making breakfast Saturday morning, something that hadn't happened in months. By Saturday, I was conducting what I realized was probably an unhealthy experiment, but I needed to understand what was happening in my own marriage. I needed to know if what I was observing was real, or if I was projecting my own frustrations onto innocent interactions. Saturday night, I not only avoided any physical approach, I made sure to seem genuinely disinterested. I read a book in bed while she watched videos on her phone, kept conversation light and non-romantic, treated her like a friendly roommate. I was testing whether her improved mood was simply about the absence of pressure, or if it was about something deeper. She was practically glowing with contentment. She chatted about her sister's upcoming birthday party, made plans for a girls' day out the following weekend, even suggested we try that new restaurant downtown. All the social energy and planning enthusiasm that had been missing from our interactions for months suddenly reappeared when I wasn't trying to connect with her romantically. Sunday morning, she was humming while making breakfast, something she hadn't done in months. She was chatty, affectionate in non-physical ways, seemed genuinely happy to be around me. She made jokes, shared gossip from her book club, even complimented the shirt I was wearing. All because I had spent 3 days not wanting her. That's when it hit me with the force of an uncomfortable truth. She wasn't just avoiding intimacy. She was happier when I avoided it too. Her ideal version of our relationship was one where I didn't desire her at all. I started paying closer attention to her reactions, not in a creepy surveillance way, but with the awareness of a man who was finally seeing his marriage clearly. When I reached for her hand while watching TV, there was a subtle tension, a slight stiffening that suggested my touch was unwelcome. When I hugged her from behind while she was cooking, she went slightly rigid, enduring the contact rather than enjoying it. When I suggested we take a shower together, she found 17 reasons why that wouldn't work, from water pressure to scheduling to suddenly remembering she needed to call her mother. But when I kept my hands to myself, when I maintained emotional distance, when I treated her like a friend rather than a wife, she was relaxed and happy. She'd curl up on the opposite end of the couch, perfectly content with the space between us. She'd chat easily about her day, her plans, her thoughts on everything except our relationship. She was more herself when I wasn't trying to be close to her. The first week of November, I made a decision that probably saved my sanity and definitely changed my life. I stopped initiating anything physical. Completely. No touching beyond the occasional hug hello or goodbye. No romantic gestures. No attempts at intimacy. No subtle suggestions or hopeful glances. I decided to give her exactly what she seemed to want, which was a husband who didn't want her. The change in her demeanor was immediate and dramatic. It was like watching someone relax after months of holding their breath. Monday night, when bedtime came and went without any approach from me, she was visibly more relaxed. She read her book peacefully, made pleasant conversation about her day at the marketing firm where she worked, seemed genuinely content. There was no tension, no anticipation of having to deflect unwanted attention, no need to prepare excuses or brace herself for disappointment when she had to reject me again. Tuesday was even better from her perspective. She started planning activities that would keep us busy but separate. A girls' night out for Friday, a solo yoga class on Saturday morning, a book club meeting Sunday afternoon. She was actively creating a schedule that minimized our time alone together, and she was doing it with obvious enthusiasm. "I'm thinking of taking that pottery class I mentioned," she said over dinner Tuesday night. "It's Thursday evenings for 6 weeks." "That sounds great," I replied, genuinely meaning it. If pottery made her happy, she should do pottery. "And Sarah wants to do a weekend trip to that spa upstate next month. Would you mind if I went?" A few months ago, I might have minded. Not because I wanted to control her activities, but because I would have wanted to go with her, or at least missed her while she was gone. Now, the idea of a weekend to myself sounded perfectly fine. Of course not. You should go. She smiled with what looked like genuine gratitude. You're so understanding. I really appreciate that you're not clingy like some husbands. Clingy. Wanting to spend time with my wife made me clingy. Wednesday, she commented to her sister during a phone call, which I overheard from the kitchen while making coffee. Things are so much better now. He's finally understanding my needs and not being so pushy about everything. Pushy. Wanting intimacy with my wife made me pushy. I stood there stirring sugar into my coffee, listening to her describe my previous attempts at connection as character flaws that I'd fortunately outgrown. She talked about me like I was a problem that had been solved, a source of pressure that had been eliminated. Thursday, she seemed to interpret my emotional distance as a sign that I was finally accepting the new dynamic she preferred. She became more talkative about everything except our relationship, more planning-oriented about activities that kept us busy but apart, more comfortable in general. She started making decisions about her social calendar without consulting me, not because she was being inconsiderate, but because she'd apparently decided I didn't need or want to be included. By Friday, exactly 1 week into my experiment, she made a comment that crystallized everything I'd been observing. You know, she said while we were having dinner at the kitchen table, I really appreciate how you've been lately. It's nice to just be comfortable without all the pressure. I put down my fork and looked at her directly. What pressure? You know, the expectation that we have to be physical all the time. It's so much better when we can just enjoy each other's company without all that drama. Drama. She called my desire for physical connection with my wife drama. So you're happier when I don't want to be intimate with you? I asked as directly as possible. She paused, probably realizing how that sounded when stated so bluntly, but then doubled down instead of backtracking. I'm happier when I don't feel pressured to be something I'm not. What exactly are you not? I'm not someone who needs all that physical stuff to be happy in a relationship. I thought you understood that by now. I mean, we're adults. We can have a mature relationship without being all over each other constantly. Constantly. We've been intimate maybe 6 times in the past year, and she described my desire for more as wanting it constantly. But I am someone who needs that to be happy in a marriage, I said quietly. Well, maybe you need to adjust your expectations. Not everyone is obsessed with sex. Some of us value emotional connection and intellectual compatibility more than physical stuff. Obsessed. Wanting normal marital intimacy made me obsessed. Maybe I do need to adjust my expectations, I said, meaning something entirely different than what she heard. She smiled, clearly thinking she had won something important. Exactly. See, this is how it should be. We can be happy without all the complications. We can focus on what really matters. And what really matters? I asked. Friendship, companionship, shared goals, emotional support, all the things that last when physical attraction fades. She was describing a business partnership, not a marriage. She was outlining a relationship model where passion was not just unnecessary, but actively unwelcome. That night, I lay in bed listening to her breathe peacefully beside me, realizing that my wife had just told me she was happiest when I didn't want her. She had celebrated the death of physical intimacy in our marriage and expected me to celebrate with her. More than that, she had reframed my acceptance of this death as maturity, as personal growth, as evidence that I was finally becoming the kind of husband she could be comfortable with. The second week of November, I continued the experiment, but now with full awareness of what I was documenting. She had settled completely into the new routine. No more excuses needed because there were no more approaches to deflect. No more tension because there were no more expectations to manage. No more careful timing of rejections because there was nothing to reject. She started talking about me differently to her friends, and I heard fragments of phone conversations that revealed how she'd reframed our relationship. She described me as finally mature enough to understand boundaries and not needy anymore. She had reframed my withdrawal as personal growth rather than recognizing it as emotional distance. He's learned to appreciate what we have instead of always wanting more, I heard her tell her friend Janet during a Saturday morning phone call. It's so refreshing to be with someone who doesn't make everything about physical needs. Physical needs. Like wanting intimacy with your spouse was some kind of character weakness. Monday of the 3rd week, she mentioned during dinner that her friend Sarah's husband still expected romance all the time, and how exhausting that must be for Sarah. She seemed genuinely grateful that I wasn't like other husbands who wanted their wives to want them. She had created a narrative where my desire for her had been a burden, and my loss of that desire was a gift. Tuesday, she planned a weekend trip with her sister for the following month, not asking if I minded, just informing me of her plans. Lisa and I are going to that new spa resort upstate the weekend of December 10th. I already booked it. A few months ago, this would have hurt. Not because I wanted to control her travel, but because the casual assumption that I wouldn't want to be included would have stung. Now, it just confirmed what I already knew. She was actively creating more space between us, apparently under the assumption that I preferred it this way. Wednesday, I decided to test one more thing. During a casual conversation while we were both reading in the living room, I asked her directly, "Are you happy in our marriage?" She looked up from her book with genuine surprise, as if the question itself was strange. "Very happy. Why would you ask that?" "Just curious. Sometimes it's good to check in. Things are so much better now that we're not constantly dealing with all those expectations and tensions. I feel like we can finally just be ourselves." "What if I told you I wasn't happy?" She set down her book and looked at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Why wouldn't you be happy? Everything is so peaceful now. We don't fight. We don't have all that drama. We just enjoy each other's company." "Peaceful for you. What about what I need?" "You're getting what you need. We have a stable relationship without all the drama and pressure. We talk, we laugh, we support each other. Isn't that what marriage should be about?" "What if what I need includes physical intimacy?" Her expression shifted to something between annoyance and condescension. "Then you need to decide what's more important, some physical stuff or a good marriage. Because you can't have both if it means making your partner uncomfortable." There it was. In her mind, physical intimacy and a good marriage were mutually exclusive. She genuinely believed that a marriage without physical connection was superior to one with it. She had created a framework where wanting intimacy with your spouse was inherently selfish and demanding it was inherently abusive. Thursday evening, while we were cleaning up after dinner, she made another comment that revealed how completely she'd rewritten our relationship history. "I'm so glad we worked through all those issues we had early in our marriage," she said while loading the dishwasher. "What issues?" "You know, when you were always pressuring me for physical stuff. I was worried we weren't compatible, but you've really grown as a person. You've learned to value the important things." She had retroactively redefined the early passion in our relationship as a problem that needed solving. The attraction that had brought us together was now framed as immature behavior that I'd fortunately outgrown. Thursday night, she made the comment that ended everything. We were watching TV, sitting on opposite ends of the couch with a careful space between us, when she stretched and said with obvious contentment, "This is perfect. This is exactly how marriage should be. Comfortable, peaceful, no pressure, no expectations. I'm so glad you finally understand what really matters." She had just described her ideal marriage as one where her husband didn't want her. She was celebrating the absence of desire, the elimination of passion, the death of physical connection. And she expected me to celebrate it too. "So your perfect marriage is one where your husband doesn't want you?" I asked quietly. "My perfect marriage is one where my husband values me for more than just physical things. Where he respects my boundaries and doesn't make me feel guilty for not being interested in all that stuff." What if he is interested in all that stuff? Then he needs to grow up and learn what love really means. That's when I realized she didn't want a husband. She wanted a roommate who split the bills and didn't bother her with inconvenient needs like desire or passion or physical connection. Friday morning, I made my decision. Not in anger, not in spite, but with the kind of clarity that only comes when you finally stop lying to yourself about what your relationship really is. I waited until the following Tuesday when she had her book club meeting. She left the house at 7 p.m., excited to discuss whatever romance novel they were reading this month. The irony wasn't lost on me that she enjoyed reading about passion and desire in fiction while rejecting it completely in real life. I packed systematically and quietly. Personal clothes, books, electronics, documents, anything that belonged solely to me. Nothing that belonged to both of us. Nothing that would create a legal dispute. I wasn't stealing from her. I was simply removing myself from a situation where my presence was clearly unwanted, where my desires were viewed as character flaws, where my needs were seen as immature demands. I left my wedding ring on the dresser next to her jewelry box, along with my house key. No note, no explanation, no dramatic gesture. She had told me exactly what kind of marriage she wanted. I was simply giving her the opportunity to have it without me. The drive to my brother's house was surreal. 3 years of marriage ending not with a fight or betrayal, but with the quiet recognition that we wanted fundamentally different things from a relationship. She wanted companionship without passion. I wanted a marriage that included both. She called my phone at 9:47 p.m. I didn't answer. She called 6 more times before midnight. I listened to the voicemails the next morning. The first one was confused. "Hey, where are you? Your stuff is gone. This is weird. Call me back." The second was irritated. "This is ridiculous. Whatever you're trying to prove, just come home and we'll talk about it. You can't just disappear like this." The third was angry. "You can't just leave without talking about this. We're married. You don't get to throw a tantrum and run away like a child." The fourth was pleading. "Please call me back. I don't understand what's happening. If I did something wrong, we can talk about it." The fifth was desperate. "I know you're getting these messages. This is insane. You can't just leave without talking about it. We can work this out." The sixth was back to angry. "Fine. Be childish. But you're going to have to come back eventually. You can't just abandon a marriage." The seventh was quiet, uncertain. "I keep thinking about our conversation the other night. Did I say something wrong? I thought we were both happy with how things were going." I never called her back. 2 weeks later, she started showing up at my workplace during lunch, demanding to talk. Security had to escort her out twice before she got the message that I wasn't going to engage. The divorce papers were filed 3 weeks after I left. She contested them, claiming the marriage could be saved with counseling. Her lawyer argued that I had abandoned the marriage without attempting to resolve our differences through proper channels. My lawyer pointed out that a marriage where one spouse celebrates the absence of physical intimacy is a marriage that has already ended. We had attempted to resolve our differences through conversation and compromise. She wanted a passionless relationship, and I wanted a marriage. Those differences were irreconcilable. During the divorce proceedings, she tried to argue that I had suddenly changed and become unreasonably demanding. She claimed that I had been perfectly happy with our arrangement until I decided to throw it all away over sex. The court records show her testimony. He never complained about our relationship. We were happy. Then one day he just decided he wasn't getting enough physical attention and abandoned our marriage. It was completely out of nowhere. Completely out of nowhere. 3 years of gradual rejection, months of clear communication about my needs, weeks of her celebrating my withdrawal, and she characterized my leaving as sudden and unexplained. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. She kept the house, but struggled with the mortgage payments on her single income. I learned from mutual friends that she had expected me to return within days, maybe a week at most. She had genuinely believed that my leaving was a temporary tantrum rather than a permanent decision based on fundamental incompatibility. 6 months after the divorce was final, I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. She looked tired, older, like someone who hadn't been sleeping well. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down at my table without being invited. "We really don't. I've been thinking about everything that happened. Maybe I was too rigid about some things. Maybe we could try again." "What's changed?" I asked. "I understand now that physical stuff is important to some people. I could try to be more accommodating." Accommodating. She was offering to accommodate my need for intimacy, like it was a quirky preference she could tolerate. "That's not what I wanted," I said quietly. "Then what did you want?" "I wanted a wife who wanted me, not someone who would accommodate me." She stared at me for a long moment. "I didn't want you. Just not in that way." "Then you wanted a friend, not a husband." I left her sitting there, and I've never spoken to her since. A year later, I heard through mutual friends that she was dating but having trouble with relationships. Apparently, most men expected physical intimacy at some point, and she couldn't understand why modern dating was so pressure-filled and demanding. She started posting on social media about the unrealistic expectations men have in relationships, the toxic nature of physical desire, and how rare it was to find someone who valued emotional connection over base physical needs. She had learned nothing from our marriage except that men who wanted intimacy were the problem. 2 years later, I was in a relationship with someone who understood that physical intimacy isn't pressure or expectation, but expression. Someone who viewed desire as a gift rather than an imposition. Someone who wanted to be wanted and who wanted me in return. The difference was startling. I had forgotten what it felt like to be with someone who lit up when I touched her, who initiated contact as often as I did, who viewed physical connection as an essential part of emotional intimacy rather than an unfortunate obligation. I had forgotten what it felt like to be desired rather than tolerated. Emma, my current partner, actually thanks me when I kiss her unexpectedly. She pulls me closer instead of going rigid. She suggests intimacy as often as I do. She treats physical connection like a gift we give each other rather than a favor she grants me. I can't imagine being married to someone who didn't want me, she said one night when I told her about my previous marriage. How lonely that must have been. Lonely. That was exactly what it had been. Lonely in the most profound way possible, lying next to someone who was happier when you didn't want them. Meanwhile, my ex-wife continued posting about her dating struggles, about how hard it was to find mature men who didn't make relationships all about sex, about how society had warped people's understanding of real love. 3 years after our divorce, I learned through a former colleague that she was seeing a therapist who had suggested that her issues with physical intimacy might stem from deeper problems with emotional connection. Apparently, the therapist had pointed out that rejecting physical affection often indicates an inability to be vulnerable in relationships. She had fired the therapist and found a new one who validated her belief that society places too much emphasis on physical connection in romantic relationships. 4 years later, she was still single, still posting about the impossibility of finding someone who shared her mature values around physical intimacy. She had joined online communities for people who identified as having low interest in physical connection, where she found validation for her belief that most people were shallow and over-sexualized. She never seemed to realize that she had found exactly what she claimed to want. A man who loved her without needing physical expression of that love. A man who was content with companionship and conversation. A man who didn't pressure her or have expectations or create drama around intimacy. She had that man for 3 years, and she was happiest when he stopped wanting her. So I gave her exactly what made her happy. I stopped wanting her permanently. The last I heard, she was still single, still struggling to understand why relationships never worked out for her, still posting about the impossibility of finding someone who understood that real love didn't require physical expression. She got exactly what she asked for. A life free from the pressure of someone wanting her, free from the complications of physical intimacy, free from a husband who viewed desire as part of love rather than separate from it. She just never realized that getting what she wanted would cost her everything else. Sometimes when I'm with Emma, laughing about something silly or simply enjoying comfortable silence together, I think about that Wednesday night when I first noticed my ex-wife's relief at my withdrawal. That moment of recognition changed everything, not because it revealed something new about her, but because it finally made me see what had been true for months. She taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave someone who's happier without you. She wanted peace over passion, comfort over connection, solitude over intimacy. She wanted a marriage that felt like a good friendship with shared expenses. I gave her the peace she craved by removing the source of her discomfort. Me. The haunting part isn't that our marriage ended. Marriages end for all kinds of reasons, and sometimes that's the healthiest outcome for everyone involved. The haunting part is that she celebrated its ending every single day and expected me to celebrate with her. She thought she had trained me to want less instead of realizing she had taught me that I deserved more. 5 years later, she finally has the perfect relationship she always wanted. No pressure, no expectations, no drama, no demands for physical connection. She's completely alone, and based on her social media presence and the reports from mutual friends, she still doesn't understand why. The most haunting part of all is that she still tells people I left out of nowhere for no reason. She genuinely believes that a marriage where the wife celebrates her husband's lack of desire is a good marriage that was destroyed by his unreasonable expectations. She got exactly what she asked for, and she's been haunted by the consequences ever since.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.